without a doubt, it is the most historically reproduced document.
Yeah.
Well reproduced document.
And closest to the time of the actual dating.
Yes.
So here's what I would say to you. If you're skeptical about the New Testament documents, about it being real history and eyewitness testimony, you can't trust anything in history. Not a thing.
I accept that.
Yeah.
It's not important to me to trust Plato.
Yeah. Or I'm saying on the sense of any historical event ever.
Well,
so
history is usually written by the winners. It changes on perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
and here's the question I would say to you too. Where does your skepticism lead you? To what worldview?
It's not necessarily a worldview.
Let me ask you a question. It is a worldview question. Here's one question.
I'm following what you mean by
I have one. Okay. A worldview consists of a view of reality, a view of knowledge, how you know things, and a view of, say, ethics. Right, I would say this. Right now, you're appealing to things like logical consistency and coherence, and I want to know the facts and evidence, right?
Yes.
Okay. That right there presupposes a biblical worldview. In a worldview where there is no God and all you are is matter and motion, just protoplasm moving around, all you would have is a material universe. Okay? And what you're appealing to right now are laws of logic and reason that are immaterial, invariant, absolutes, that we're all appealing to right now, thinking even as I'm talking right now. So here's my question to you. In your skeptical worldview, how are you borrowing from mine to make sense of yours?
It's more of... The fact is, you're a Catholic Christian. Everyone has to be. You cannot take everything in the Bible and apply it to your life because there's too many contradictions. Why do you
Once
think...
again, hold on. You got to answer this. Ready? Before we can move forward about contradictions, you have to explain how you're borrowing from my worldview to use the word contradictions. Because you're not allowed to do that. To be logical and reasonable, you're not allowed to borrow from my worldview to make sense of yours. You have to stick to your worldview.
Why?
Well, because it's inconsistent and incoherent. How could you be trying to discount the biblical worldview?
The morals and ethics in here aren't copyrighted to the Bible. The
I didn't say morals.
Murder's not wrong in the Bible.
One second. You've got to be consistent here. We're not talking about morals and ethics. We're talking about logic.
Oh, that's what we're... Oh.
No, logic. How are you borrowing laws of logic? How do laws of logic, how are they coherent in your worldview?
Things get explained.
Isn't that arbitrary?
Possibly.
Okay. So far your worldview is this, is that we can't trust anything in history, we don't know anything about history, and we can just arbitrarily make up our own rules. Try building a bridge like that.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, I'm trying to show you that you need to be consistent with your worldview, because it seems to me like you want to attack the biblical world.
We can't trust anything in history. We possibly can. It's not an absolute. It's not that all of history can be trusted. Some history might be completely
But in your view, you can't trust the New Testament documents and that eyewitness testimony. We have to answer the question, okay? Because you're here to get these questions answered and try to work through these things. You have to answer the question that you've got to come to terms with, and everyone in this room does. How are you looking for logical coherence and rationality and reason in a worldview that has no God to even allow for induction, that the future is like the past, or that there's uniformity in nature? Because, see, I would say in your worldview, if there were no God, and all there is the material universe, we couldn't assume induction, that tomorrow will be like today, that nature is uniform. We couldn't assume that, because all it is matter and motion. Carl Sagan saying the cosmos is all there is, was, or ever will be. It's just stuff moving around. There's no reason to assume induction. And right now, in everything you're doing, you're assuming induction. My question to you...
Well, no. Okay. It's ridiculous to say that you can't assume these things because you don't attribute an absolute power to creating everything.
Let me put it a better way, just to show you so it's clear. Your worldview doesn't satisfy the preconditions of intelligibility to even make intelligible use of those things. So and here's the question. You can arbitrarily borrow from my worldview, but the question is, how is it...
Just because you can't explain why we can think doesn't mean that we can't think.
Oh, there's no question you're thinking. The question is, that here's the challenge, is your worldview can't account for thinking at all.
Neither can yours.
Absolutely.
No.
And I'll explain it. I'll give you the rational foundations. Let me answer.
You can't attribute to the truth.
Let me answer. And this is good that you guys are hearing this. It's important to see that the atheistic or agnostic worldview is totally arbitrary. It's subjective and can't even answer its own foundations. It has to borrow from a Christian worldview to make sense of its own. You see, I can make sense of rationality and reason because I believe, ready, in a God who carries everything along to its intended conclusion. I have a reason to believe that nature is uniform. I have an intellectual foundation for that fact. Also, I believe in a God who is immaterial. I believe that there are immaterial aspects to my being. You don't. You believe in a material universe.
Okay.
So I can make sense out of the reason that I'm using and the logic that I'm using because God, ready? My thoughts are to be a reflection of the way God thinks. And the uniformity that I'm appealing to is uniformity that's been brought about by an all-knowing, infinite, holy, personal being. Now, in a worldview that's devoid of that rational foundation, how do you come off borrowing from my worldview to make sense of yours?
Taking everything in this book and saying that it's all true. This is the kind of stuff...
Explain truth in a universe where there's no absolutes.
Is the world the center of is the earth the center of the universe?
You're getting away from the question.
No, I'm
truth.
not. I'm directly answering it.
I want to answer what you said. Let's talk about truth. Okay? Truth. Explain objective truth in a worldview where there's no rational foundation for objective truth.
Just like in your worldview, there's a consensus reached. Just like there's a consensus that the world's not the center of the universe. Galileo was persecuted by the church. And then people started realizing that maybe the sun is the center of the solar system, and there was a consensus reached. And people in the church started accepting it. I accept that the earth's not the center of the universe, but 500 years ago they didn't.
Can I answer my question about objective truth?
I am, because the objective truth is that there's a consensus reached on the objective truth in the church and outside of the church.
So in your worldview,
it's not a worldview.
It is a worldview. In your worldview, you do have a particular worldview. Everyone has a worldview. Like
objective truth.
Real fast. Objective truth. Is it okay, let's say, to molest a child?
No.
Is it because we say so, or is it because there's an objective moral standard we all need to follow? But what if I create a society that says it's okay to molest children and to rape them and beat them? Is that acceptable? What if I get a larger society that overwhelms your society? We become the largest society. Does it make it right?
No.
Because we're larger. Because we come to a consensus on it. So the question I have to ask you, if your view of reality, your view of, say, morality and logic, are simply based on the consensuses of men, okay, isn't it totally arbitrary? What if I just establish a civilization that makes one contrary to yours?
Well,
let me ask you a question. Is raping children wrong?
I do. I feel it is. I feel it's completely wrong.
If I rape a child, is it okay if I say that I believe that it's right?
Not to me, it's not.
Okay, not to you, but it's okay if I do it.
No, it's not okay.
Why?
Because it's not okay to me. It's wrong.
What if to me, though, it is?
Well, there are people like you that think it's okay to rape children.
Should I go to jail?
Well, I think you should.
Right, but why? Isn't it arbitrary?
Well, because the majority's with me and we can enforce it.
But what if I create a large majority that says raping children is okay?
Well, then
do you guys see the arbitrariness and inconsistency of the material worldview? It has to borrow realities and truths from my worldview about an objective moral standard in order to make sense of its own. And when you press and challenge this worldview, it cannot make sense of itself except to say, well, it's wrong for me.